The Great Debaters Contest is powered by Blaze, by Safaricom, the Youth Network.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another great episode of the Great Debaters Contest. Having touched down in Kiambu region, I'm your host, Austin Yambong.
And I am Mariam Bishar. Of course, we continue our conversation on the Sustainable Development Goals. Should developing countries put a debt limit to curb their debt burden? We'll have Kiambu High School and Allaince Girls High School take the stage to debate this motion. Proposer number 1, you have 3 minutes.
My name is George Moshiri from Kiambu High School, and I'm here to propose the motion that says that debt limits should be put in place to control debt burden on developing countries. What are debt limits? Debt limit is a maximum amount of money that a country should borrow. What are debt burden? Debt burden is amount of money, a large amount of money that a country is unable to repay. Why do I propose this motion? This is why. High taxation. Now, our country is among the highest, the countries with the that citizens pay the highest taxes. Now, the Kenya Revenue Authority has raised the fine for late filing of income tax from 1,000 shillings to 20,000 shillings. Why is the country doing this? Because we have had debts recently. Money was borrowed for the construction of the SGR. We just finished to pay the Thika Superhighway. Now tell me, where are we going to get funds to pay these debts? Is it not for the taxes? So, if there's no limit to debts, we'll have a huge amount of debts and we'll end up hurting the citizens who will pay high taxes, that despite how hard they work, that their taxes are too high, that they cannot cope. Another reason why I propose this motion is because debt costs retarded development. Now, Kenya borrowed 176 billion, and from China, it will pay back 278 billion. Now, listen, this money, are we gaining or are we losing? Money, the debts that we borrow have high interest. They have high interest. And therefore, instead of moving forward, we are moving backwards. We move 1 step forward and 2 steps backward. Is that what we want for our country? That in years to come, we'll be paying the debts of years of the previous regimes that were there. This is not what we want for our country. We want our country to grow economically. And therefore, we have to put a limit to the debts. Another reason why I propose this motion is because that there are failed investments that do not achieve the projected rates. A country borrows debts, a country borrows money from financial institutions like the IMF and World Bank or developed countries, but that money that it invests, it failed to bring the projected returns. So we end up making more losses when we borrow debts and they do not bring back any revenue for us. And so that is why that we should promote debt limits on developing countries. Now, misappropriation of funds by dictatorial regimes. In 1869, back way in 1869, in Egypt, there reigned a king called Khedive Ismail. Khedive Ismail used 1 million euros for the opening of the Suez Canal. If there was a debt limit, he wouldn't have done this. 500 chefs were involved in that event of 1 single day. Is this what we would wish for developing countries? Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. Ladies, you have 3 minutes to make your opening statements.
Valeria Kerubo from Allaince Girls High School, opposing the motion, debt limits should be put in place to control debt burden on developing countries. So first, it's good to accept the fact that developing countries actually need financial help. That's why they're called developing countries. And the only way they can get this money to be of lasting and beneficial value is by debit. For instance, the Panama Canal, the International Monetary Fund withdrew funding it in the year 1982. This led to the stalling of the canal. Nevertheless, in 2012, the EU decided to fund it. And right now, the Panama Canal is now earning revenue for Panama. And then, we take a look, like if these developing countries are actually allowed to borrow or to get the debt, they will invest it in profitable sections and thus generate enough to pay off the principal debt. Thus, the question remains, if we put debit limits on them, will these countries, will these less developed countries experience financial bloom? I don't think so. So thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll hear cross-examinations. Gentlemen, you have 3 minutes.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to remind you that the motion is not about whether we should borrow or not. Because the motion clearly shows us we should borrow. The question is, should we borrow too much or should we put a limit to it? That is the question. Have you understood? Okay then, let me continue. I'd first of all like to say that when we borrow too much money, it leads the credibility of a country in question. This will also lead to insolvency. What is insolvency? Insolvency is like bankruptcy, only on a nationwide scale. Okay? So if I'd give an example, I'd use Greece. Greece had an economic crisis whereby it was unable to pay its debts, and the debts were overwhelmingly huge. This led to Greece having to take up measures to be able to pay the debts so they can be manageable. Like what? Like, for example, budget cuts. For example, the laying off of civil servants. It led to mass-scale unemployment, and it led to economic downward spiral, in short. So, should we borrow too much? I don't think so. We should borrow, but let's not forget, we shouldn't depend on borrowing. We should borrow, but only borrow to a maximum. And what is the recommended debt limit? According to Vox EU, it says that 40% debt to GDP ratio is the recommended limit for developing countries. So, has Kenya, as a developing country, for example, Kenya, has it passed this limit? Yes, it has. We have gone up to 52%. And I'd like to say that if we continue like this, we are going to go the Greek way. And I don't think we want the Greek way. Also, when it comes to borrowing too much money, let's not forget that this money we are borrowing, they have strings attached. They have strings attached, actually. IMF gives loans, a lot of loans, without even thinking. Gives, right? But then it tells a country, it gives a country conditions. This happened in Cyprus, this happened in Greece, and this happened in Jamaica. Because it can tell a country, do this, we are giving you money, we're giving you so much money, we're not even thinking how much we're giving you. So you have to do what we say. In short, borrowing too much money promotes something I'd like to call, and we all know about, neo-colonialism. Neo-colonialism, ladies and gentlemen. I think I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you. Allaince girls, you have 3 minutes for your rebuttal.
Well then. Impossible is not a declaration. It is a dare. It is potential. And in itself, it says, I am possible. So, I would like to ask my worthy advisories, as much as you say that we move forwards only to move backwards, don't you know by physics, the farther back you move, the farther ahead you shall go. Furthermore, you say we have high taxation, but I would like for you to read all of Kenya's economic policies in our recent budget. All these policies ensure that there is appropriation of funds, there is accountability, and there is transparency. Until this point, I would like to say, Wangeshi Weweru, Allaince Girls High School, strongly opposing the fact that, well, it is not a fact, rather it is a motion. Debit limits should be put in place to control debt burden on developing countries. I would like to tell you of the Bretton Woods Agreement of 1944. These agreements enabled the United States to have floating exchange rates so that they might not be knee-deep in debt. And the United States right now, who would use any other currency for trade rather than the dollar? So I pose this question unto you. As much as you say that there is a 40% debt to GDP ratio, don't you know that the 3.5 billion borrowed for the SGR might be increased fivefold, tenfold? Who knows what is in future for Kenya? Simply, borrowing is the way to go. For the more money you borrow, the more money you have to invest in your profitable sectors. The more money you will gain and pay off your debts. And let me ask you this one question. We are part of a less developed country. How do you think we will survive if we do not have money to invest? Furthermore, we are countries who have produced the raw materials. If it is not for us, the processing countries do not have enough money. The processing countries do not have enough materials to bank on. Germany is using Kenya for its coffee. But guess what? What if we borrowed? What if the money came to a manufacturing plant in Kenya? Don't you know we'd make so much more? That is my question. And that is my rebuttal unto you. Thank you.
Thank you very much to the audience for those questions. The proposers have been asked to give the conditions that they have said were set by the IMF to developing countries should they choose to borrow. And the opposition have been asked, why should developing countries continue to borrow when most of the money is used for recurrent expenditure as opposed to for development purposes? We'll have them respond. Third proposer, you have 3 minutes.
I'm Lewis, and I'm here to propose on the motion that debt limit should be imposed on developing countries to prevent debt burdens. First of all, I'm very proud of you guys. You reminded me the Newton's first law of motion, but I think we're here for a greater purpose. And first of all, I think that borrowed capital should not, and I repeat and insist, should not be used as a form of capital for our nation. And remember, you also went wrong here saying, remember, we are majoring on developing countries. So talking about USA, I think we are wrong somewhere. Thank you for that question, my brother. And I think that when you ask about why we are undergoing losses, I think the answers are obvious. Mismanagement of these funds. You find in a case where I've borrowed money, but the first thing I want to do, I want to build a bigger house, and yet I'm a leader. Remember, and again, a point of correction, the SGR cost a total of 327 billion shillings. And we should remember that a lot of this cash was from borrowed capital. And remember, we still have to pay back this money. And we are expected not to pay back just 327, it is more to it. Then, here's the parting shot. When KRA imposes late filing for taxes, do you think this is normal? That you're paying 20,000 from 1,000 shillings for late filing of tax? No. Remember, this money we are expected, just the other day, I think we were given a warning that our loans are increasing. But remember, when we talk about developing countries, and I'm sure I'm going to get a question why they're not asking to other countries, it is because this is a developing countries, and they are also looking at our capability to pay back. Tell me, for how long am I going to borrow money from outside to cater for our people and our population? I don't think so, because I think that Kenya, we should, and I repeat, we should measure on our own resources. Just the other day, we discovered oil in Turkana. Just the other day, we have titanium. No, look, I don't do very well. Do we think we still have to borrow money? I don't think so. Come on, crossover. Then someone said, and I'll be particular, this came from my father, and he told me, you will never find a new island with an old map. Using 1970s tactics to solve our problems is not the solution. I rest my case.
Thank you. Ladies, you have 3 minutes to give your response.
My name is Donna Nyaboke of the Allaince Girls High School, and I'm here to strongly oppose the motion that debit limit should be put in place to control debt burden on developing countries. Thank you, Betty, for your beautiful question on why we should continue borrowing when the money we borrow is used for current expenditure. My dearest brother, talk about the taxes we pay. Taxes, if you are a history student, is used for current expenditure. Money borrowed is used for development. General knowledge. Talking about payment of the SGR. The payment has begun, and this is through various ways. Kenya has begun lowering import duty for items from China, which in turn will help China save money. This money compounded together will help in lowering our debt. Let us remember that the motion does not tell us to stop borrowing. The motion does not tell us that we should not ask when we need. It is simply telling us that we should set limits. Why limit yourself when you can grow so much more with help from others? Why? Talking about statistics from the olden days, the reason why we use that is because history repeats itself. And the only way we can learn is if we watch from our past, and if we learn and impart the knowledge in ourselves and use it to protect our future generations. The lower rate at which capital is obtained, the further capital works will be extended. If you borrow less, it will take you a longer time to invest, and it will take you a longer time to pay back your debt. Take, for example, 3 shillings and 5 shillings. If you borrow 3 shillings, the output of a 3 shillings will take longer for you to be able to build your business and be able to pay back your debt. But if you have 5 shillings and you use it to repay, you will be able to invest more and therefore produce more. Think about it. The more we borrow, the more we invest in our industries, the more we are able to add value to our raw materials. Borrowing doesn't necessarily mean that we give everything we have to other people. Borrowing can bring us closer to home. Also, think about it. Odious debt. Currently, Nicaragua's odious debt is 5 times its GDP. What is odious debt? Odious debt is money that was loaned to an illegitimate government and was used for personal gain rather than to build a country. How will Nicaragua, a young country, pay for its colonialists' mistake? Unless they borrow money, invest in their industries, and use the money that is produced to protect their industries. Kenya has registered a continuous GDP growth. Do you think this is because of all what we have done on our own? I beg to differ. Sometimes you need help to grow.
Thank you. We're ready for final statements. Gentlemen, you have a minute.
What you are simply saying is we need debt. We need to borrow debt, but there should be a limit. Instead, we should utilize our resources. Countries like Russia, United Arab Emirates, and Saudi Arabia have least debts. Why? Because they utilize the oil and the natural gas in their countries. We should not say that there is no limit for debt. All you want is to borrow, and then borrow. We shouldn't go to a point in the book called Mstahiki Meya by Timothy Arege, said that we depend on debt to pay public servants. And that's why we need a debt limit. That's why we need a set standard, either by the lending institutions, e.g. IMF and World Bank. For example, the recommended is 40%, and also statutory policies in the country, like, for example, laws passed by the parliament to limit our debts for the sake of the future generations who are going to feel the pain of paying these debts. Thank you.
Ladies, we'll hear your final submission. You have 1 minute.
The only way for us to help ourselves is for us not to put ourselves within a box. The best way to think is to think simply without the box. Why limit yourself when you can do so much more? Why limit ourselves to being a consumer country when we can borrow and become a producer country? Why limit ourselves to becoming a small, helpless child when even children grow up? So can we. We can grow. Borrowing doesn't mean we will be unable to pay. Impossibility is just another word in the dictionary. It doesn't have to apply to us. It doesn't have to tie us down by various ways of limiting ourselves or for not asking for help. The only way we can grow is if we ask for help. The only way you can move on is to accept that you are not strong on your own. A wall cannot be built with one brick. It needs cement, it needs sand. Plus, who's ever seen a one brick wall? I rest my case.
First speaker said we make some steps forward, but we make 2 steps backwards. I thought maybe you should have been more elaborate on which steps are these. If you really were saying that borrowing is bringing us back, then which steps exactly were this you were referring to? Also, on the same side, we learned quite a number of words today. We learned insolvency, and you defined that one, and neo-colonialism. Quite a number of words were brought on there, and I think you've been paying attention in your lessons. That's a very, very good thing. One of the things we look for is mastery of language. If you have researched and you showed us that you have surely done that. Good job, teams. May the best team win.
I think Alliance Girls, you're defending a very difficult position, in my opinion. You know, you're defending borrowing, and I think all over the world the discussion is we should not borrow. Instead, we should make use of the resources that we have. So I think as judges, we took note of that. You did fairly well in terms of your presentation. That is Kerubo, Waweru, and Nyaboke. Kiambu High School, George, Kiritu, and Lewis. I think a very interesting team of debaters. But I need to say the following. George, you had a bumpy start. Bumpy start because, one, you talked about SGR and Thika Superhighway, and you said that Kenya borrowed in order to build these particular infrastructures. And my question was, how much did it borrow? I did not get that from you. Number 2, you talked about failed investments. Question, like? Number 3, you talked about misappropriation of funds. By the way, did you talk about Egypt in 1869? Was it 1869? And my question is, don't we have a recent example of misappropriation of funds? Why did you choose Egypt, and why in 1869? Why not in 2017 or 2016? Or last year, or maybe 5 years ago? So you need to justify your selection of arguments. You're a good debater, but I think you need to know how to organize and structure your arguments in order to win. Kiritu and Lewis, you are outstanding. I have a weakness for a debater who does not lecture me but talks to me. When you took the stage, Kiritu, you were engaging in a dialogue, and I think that is the most important conversation that I was looking for. Number 1, you talked about reduces credibility of countries. You talked about it leads to solvency, and I love the example of Greece. I think this is an example that all of us identify with. And also you made mention of debt limit. You are very organized in your thoughts, and your presentation was well structured.
Allaince Girls High School, you were awarded 65%. Please give them a warm round of applause. Their opponents, Kiambu High School, you were awarded 72%, making you the winners of this debate.
Very well. Congratulations to the 2 teams on stage. We'd also like to thank you, our studio audience, and our viewers back home. Keep it locked, KBC Channel 1, and a big shout out to our sponsors, Safaricom Blaze. I've been your host, Austin Nyumbok.
And I am Mariam Bishar. Thank you for watching.
The Great Debaters Contest is powered by Blaze, by Safaricom, the Youth Network.